Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we try to get under the surface of really big, complex subjects, giving you the context you need to make sense of the world.
And today we're tackling, well, a truly monumental figure, Muhammad, the founder of Islam. We want to go beyond just the basics.
Right. This is about exploring his life and legacy through a historical lens, really digging into the biographical and historical material we have.
Our aim is to understand the specific events, the context, and the enormous impact that shaped not just religion, but arguably a whole global civilization.
And we actually have a surprising amount of source material to work with here, don't we? It's often said we know more details about his life than almost any other major religious founder.
That's generally true, yeah. Thanks to a really meticulous work by early scholars, we mainly rely on two kinds of sources, compiled mostly in the 8th and 9th centuries.
So a couple hundred years after his time.
Right. First, you have the Sirah, the detailed biographies like the one from Ibn Ishaq that survives through later versions. And second, these huge collections of hadith accounts of his sayings, his actions, his practices.
And those, along with the Quran itself, which isn't a biography but does name him and mentions key moments, they give us a framework.
They do. But it also throws up a challenge, doesn't it? Trying to, tease apart the historical record from the traditional narrative, which often aims to reinforce faith.
That's the tightrope we have to walk.
Absolutely. It's central to studying this period historically. But using these rich traditions, we can definitely trace the incredible political, social, and spiritual movement he set in motion. So shall we dive in? Let's start with the world he was born into.
Okay, so let's set the scene. We're talking about Western Arabia around the year 570 CE. And this wasn't some isolated backwater.
Not at all. It was actually a pretty vibrant region, though definitely fractured. You had intense tribal loyalties, major trade routes running through, and a really diverse religious landscape.
And the power structure was all about the tribes.
Right. Completely. Muhammad was born into the Quraysh tribe. They were the dominant force in Mecca, controlling the city and its resources.
But the Quraysh itself wasn't monolithic.
No, it was made up of different clans, often competing for influence. Muhammad's clan was the Banu Hashim.
And the Banu Hashim had this interesting position, didn't they? Aristocratic lineage, respected.
Definitely respected, high status in terms of lineage, but, and this is key, they weren't particularly wealthy at that time, especially compared to some other powerful Quraysh clans, like, say, the Banu Umayyah.
That economic difference seems important.
Hugely important. Meccan trade was booming, creating a lot of wealth, but it was getting concentrated in the hands of a few clans. This created significant social tension. So his clan having status, but not top-tier wealth, that's a crucial backdrop for the social critique that later becomes central to his message.
Right. And what about the religious environment? What did people actually believe before Islam?
It was, well, a real mix. Polytheism was dominant, especially in Mecca itself. Lots of different gods and goddesses worshipped, idols kept in the Kaaba.
But it wasn't only polytheism.
No, you also had established Jewish communities, particularly further north, and Christian communities too, especially in the south and border regions. And maybe most intriguingly, there were these individuals called Hanif.
The monotheists.
Yeah, people who apparently rejected the idols and worshipped one supreme god, but weren't formally Jewish or Christian. So the idea of monotheism wasn't totally alien, but it definitely wasn't the mainstream in Mecca.
And Mecca itself was the center of gravity for all this.
Absolutely pivotal. Mecca was a powerhouse, mainly because it was a major pilgrimage site focused on the Kaaba.
So religion and economics were deeply intertwined there.
Completely. The Kaaba made Mecca a religious hub, but also a kind of neutral territory where different tribes could trade safely during pilgrimage seasons. The sources even tell us the Kaaba itself needed repairs around 605 CE.
Oh, really? What was wrong with it?
It had apparently deteriorated quite a bit. It was basically just stone walls, no roof. So the Quraysh decided to rebuild it, make it more secure, put a roof on to protect the valuable offerings inside.
And this rebuilding project led to a really telling anecdote about Muhammad, didn't it?
Yeah.
Years before any revelations.
It did, yeah. The famous story of the Black Stone. When the rebuilding was almost done, a huge argument broke out among the clan leaders.
About what?
About who should get the honor of lifting the sacred Black Stone back into its place in the corner of the Kaaba. It sounds small, but it was a massive deal, a point of prestige. Things got heated, really heated. Apparently, they were on the verge of fighting, maybe even civil war within the Quraysh.
Wow. So how did Muhammad get involved? He wasn't a major clan leader at this point.
No, but this is where his reputation comes in. He was already known as Alamin the Faithful, or the Trustworthy. People respected his judgment, his fairness.
So they turned to him.
Well, the story goes, they agreed that the next man to enter the sanctuary would decide. And it was Muhammad. He didn't just pick one clan. He asked for a cloak, put the stone on it, and had a representative from each main feuding clan take a corner of the cloak.
Ah, so they lifted it together.
Exactly. They lifted it together towards the spot, and then he personally set it in place. A brilliant piece of diplomacy.
That really shows something, doesn't it? 5 years before the first revelation, he already had this kind of standing, this political skill and trust.
Immense political capital, yeah. And it highlights his pre-existing reputation for competence and integrity, which was crucial because Mecca at this time was becoming increasingly unequal.
You mentioned the wealth concentration.
Right. The money pouring in from the Kaaba and the caravan trade was making the rich elite richer, but it was really exacerbating the problems for everyone else. You had this growing underclass freedmen, people in debt, slaves who were really struggling. The social fabric was fraying.
So the conditions were ripe for some kind of social critique.
Absolutely ripe. And the earliest message of Islam hits right at that. It was a powerful challenge to the greed, the arrogance, the sort of aristocratic privilege that was defining Meccan society.
What was the focus?
A strong emphasis on taking care of the poor, the orphans, the marginalized, justice, compassion.
Which explains who was initially attracted to the message.
Precisely. If you look at the demographics of the very first followers, many were from these lower social strata: women, former slaves, servants, people without strong tribal protection.
They had the most to gain from a message of equality.
Exactly. The movement offered dignity and justice in a system that often denied them both. And you see this formalized later on in Islamic practice: strong condemnations of inherited privilege, emphasis on merit, and crucially, the mandatory alms tax, the zakat.
Right, the zakat.
Yeah, it wasn't just a suggestion, it was a core pillar, an economic mechanism designed specifically to redistribute wealth and tackle poverty head on. It shows just how deeply rooted that social reform impulse was from the very beginning.
So, turning to Muhammad's own early life, it really starts with loss, doesn't it? Hardship seems to be a defining theme right from the beginning.
It really is. His status as an orphan is absolutely central to his biography. His father, Abdullah, died before he was even born, while his mother, Amina, was pregnant.
And that is mother.
She passed away when he was only 6 years old. So effectively orphaned twice over, it left him incredibly vulnerable in that tribal society.
Who looked after him then? He
Yeah.
must have had some family support.
He did. First, he went into the care of his paternal grandfather, Abd al-Muttalib. He was a very respected leader of the Banu Hashim clan.
Okay, so that was stable for a while.
Only for about 2 years, unfortunately. His grandfather died when Muhammad was 8. Then the responsibility passed to his paternal uncle, Abu Talib.
Abu Talib is a key figure, isn't he?
Hugely important. Abu Talib wasn't one of the wealthy Hashim members, but he took Muhammad in, raised him like a son, and crucially provided him with clan protection. In that world, that protection was everything.
And it wasn't just about safety, was it? There was practical training involved, too.
Oh, yes. Survival in 7th century Arabia required certain skills. The sources mention his other uncle Hamza, who was a renowned warrior, trained him.
In what?
Things like archery, swordsmanship, basic martial skills. These were essential for defending caravans, for tribal defense, just for survival, really.
Skills he would definitely need later. And he soon got involved in the family business, so to speak, the caravan trade.
Right. He started young, helping Abu Talib with the trade caravans that went north, up towards Syria. This was a tough, demanding life, but it taught him commerce, negotiation, how the world worked outside Mecca.
And he developed a reputation even then.
He did. His competence, his honesty, they stood out. This is where that title, Al-Amin, the Trustworthy, really seems to have solidified. People knew they could rely on him.
And that reputation led to a major opportunity.
It did. It caught the eye of a woman named Khadija. She was a remarkable figure herself.
Tell us about her.
Khadija was a wealthy widow, a very successful merchant in her own right, running her own caravans. She heard about this honest, capable young man, Muhammad, and hired him to manage one of her trading ventures to Syria.
You must have impressed her.
Immensely, so much so that after he returned successfully, she proposed marriage to him.
Now, when we look at these early accounts, like his time as a merchant, how much is solid history and how much might be later embellishment? That's always a question, right?
It's a constant challenge for historians, absolutely. You have these traditional stories that are very well known. For example, the tale of young Muhammad traveling with Abu Talib's caravan and meeting a Christian monk named Bahira.
Right, the monk who supposedly recognized signs of future prophethood on him.
Exactly that story. Now, how historical is it? Many modern scholars, and actually even some medieval Muslim scholars, tend to view that specific story as, well, probably legendary or heavily embellished later on.
Why tell it then?
Well, even if it's not strictly factual, you can see its function within the tradition, right? It suggests his destiny was preordained, recognized even by wise figures outside his own community. It reinforces the narrative, so you always have to be aware of why a story might be told, not just what it says.
That makes sense. It's about understanding the layers. Okay, so back to Khadija. She proposes marriage.
Yes, and it's significant that she, a respected businesswoman, 15 years his senior, initiated it. He accepted, and this marriage was transformative for him.
How so?
It gave him financial security, something he'd never really had. It elevated his social standing further. But more than that, it seems to have been a deeply supportive and loving partnership.
And the sources really emphasize the nature of their relationship.
They do. It's consistently stressed that Muhammad remained strictly monogamous with Khadija for the entire 25 years they were married, right up until her death. This was unusual in that society.
She was his rock, essentially.
Completely. His emotional anchor, his financial supporter. Her backing gave him the stability and, importantly, the free time, the mental space that later allowed him to retreat for periods of reflection and prayer.
Which leads us to a devastating period for him, 619 CE, known as the Year of Sorrows.
A brutal year. In very quick succession, he lost both Khadija and his uncle and protector, Abu Talib.
Two pillars of his life gone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Khadija's death was obviously a huge personal, emotional blow, but Abu Talib's death was a political catastrophe for him.
Why specifically?
Because Abu Talib, even though he apparently never converted to Islam himself, had consistently used his position as a clan leader to shield Muhammad. The protection of the Banu Hashim, guaranteed by Abu Talib, was what kept the growing hostility from the rest of the Quraysh establishment at bay.
So with Abu Talib gone,
that shield was removed. Suddenly, the threats that had been mostly verbal or social could become direct, physical. The persecution could escalate dramatically. He'd lost his main source of personal comfort and his vital political protection almost simultaneously. He was left incredibly exposed in Mecca.
So this personal and political crisis in the Year of Sorrows, 619 CE, came not long after the defining spiritual event of his life, which happened around 610 CE.
Right. And that event, the first revelation, was made possible in part by the stability Khadija provided.
Because it allowed him time for spiritual retreats.
Exactly. The sources tell us he developed a habit of retreating for prayer and meditation to a cave on Jabal Anur, the mountain of light, just outside Mecca, the cave of Hira.
And it was there, around 610, when he was about 40 years old, that everything changed.
That's the traditional account. It's where he reportedly received the first divine revelation.
Now, the accounts of this first experience, they sound incredibly intense, even violent, not like a peaceful mystical vision.
Not at all. According to the traditions, the angel Gabriel Jibril in Arabic appeared to him. The angel commanded him read or recite, Iqra.
But Muhammad was illiterate, wasn't he?
Yes. He protested, "I cannot read." The angel then reportedly seized him and squeezed him or choked him with overwhelming force, almost crushing him, before repeating the command.
Wow. That sounds terrifying.
It apparently happened 3 times. This intense sequence. Command, protest, overwhelming physical pressure, then command again. Finally, Gabriel recited the first verses of what would become chapter 96 of the Quran.
That physical trauma must have had a huge psychological impact.
Profound terror, it seems. Muhammad fled the cave, shaking, deeply disturbed. He feared he'd been possessed by a jinn, one of the supernatural beings of Arabian folklore, or even a demon.
Did he really consider suicide?
The sources say he was so distressed. Yes, he contemplated throwing himself from the mountaintop. It was only, according to the story, when he saw a colossal figure, which he identified as Gabriel, filling the horizon wherever he looked, that he began to feel some sense of divine reassurance amidst the terror.
And his first instinct was to seek comfort from Khadija.
Immediately. He rushed home, apparently crying out, "Cover me! Cover me!" She wrapped him in a cloak, calmed him down, listened to his account, and, crucially, She believed him.
She didn't doubt him.
No, she immediately affirmed that this must be from God, that God wouldn't disgrace him. She even performed a kind of practical test, according to some accounts, involving her state of dress to determine if the presence was angelic or demonic.
And her cousin, Waraka, also played a role.
Yes, Waraka bin Nawfal. He was an elderly relative, knowledgeable in Jewish and Christian scriptures, perhaps one of the Hanif. Khadija took Muhammad to see him, and Waraka reportedly confirmed that this experience matched the descriptions of prophetic revelations, like those received by Moses. He affirmed Muhammad as a prophet.
That immediate validation from Khadija and Waraka must have been absolutely crucial.
Essential. Especially given Muhammad's own initial fear and reluctance, it helped him accept the experience as divine, not demonic.
But he didn't rush out to preach immediately. It started very small, very private.
Extremely private at first. The very earliest converts were his absolute inner circle. Khadija herself, his young cousin Aliya ibn Abi Talib, who lived with them, his close friend Abu Bakr, and his adopted son Zayd ibn Haritha.
And when the message did start to spread slightly wider, how was it received within the Quraysh?
It caused an immediate split. Generally, younger people, women, those with less stake in the existing power structure were more receptive. The older generation, the established leaders, the wealthy merchants whose power was tied to the Kaaba and its idols, they were mostly resistant, even hostile.
The public preaching began a few years later, around 613 CE. What was the core message causing such friction?
The absolute oneness of God Tawhid. Rejecting all the idols in polytheism, submission Islam to the will of that one God, and a strong emphasis on social justice, accountability, and the coming day of judgment.
Which directly threatened the status quo in Mecca.
Fundamentally, it challenged the religious basis of the Quraysh's authority and, very practically, the lucrative pilgrimage economy centered on the Kaaba's idols.
So how did the Meccan establishment push back?
It started with mockery and arguments. They'd challenge him, demand miracles like the prophets of old. Muhammad consistently refused, arguing that the Quran itself, its unique nature and message, was the miracle, the proof.
What came after ridicule?
Social pressure, harassment, and then outright persecution, especially targeting the more vulnerable followers, slaves, those without strong clan protection. They also put immense pressure on Abu Talib, trying to get him to withdraw his protection from Muhammad. They offered bribes, power, marriage alliances.
Which Muhammad refused.
Famously so, leading to this escalating conflict, the economic boycott against the Banu Hashim we mentioned earlier.
Right, starting around 616 CE.
A really harsh boycott. For about 3 years, other clans refused to trade with them or marry into the Hashim clan. It caused real hardship, trying to starve them into submission, essentially, to force them to hand Muhammad over or make him stop preaching.
And when that boycott eventually ended, and then Khadija and Abu Talib died in 619.
His position became desperate. He had almost no support left within Mecca.
Which led him to look elsewhere, like the nearby town of Taif.
Yes, it was an act of desperation, really. He traveled to Taif, hoping maybe they would offer him refuge, protection, a base to continue his mission.
How did that go?
Disastrously. Utterly disastrously. The leaders of Taif mocked him, rejected his message outright. Some accounts say they questioned why God would choose an orphan if he needed a messenger. Then they set the town's children and rabble upon him.
They attacked him physically?
Yes. They drove him out of the city, pelting him with stones, injuring him quite badly. He had to take refuge in an orchard outside the town. It was a devastating rejection. He couldn't even get back into Mecca safely afterward. He needed to secure the temporary protection of another clan leader, Mutim ibn Adi, just to re-enter his own hometown.
That sequence of events, the boycott, the deaths, the rejection at Taif, it really highlights why leaving Mecca became the only viable option.
It absolutely forced the issue. The hijra, the migration, wasn't just a choice. It became a necessity for survival for the movement's future. He started focusing his preaching efforts on people visiting Mecca for the pilgrimage, particularly groups from Yathrib, a city to the north.
Yathrib, which would later become Medina. Why were they more receptive?
Yathrib was suffering from long-running, bitter feuds between its main Arab tribes. They saw Muhammad, an outsider with a reputation for fairness, al-Amin, remember, as a potential arbitrator, someone who could unify the city. Plus, Yathrib had a large Jewish population, so monotheistic ideas were more familiar there.
And this led to secret meetings.
Yes, secret pledges made at a place called Aqaba, just outside Mecca, during pilgrimage seasons. Small groups initially, then a larger delegation of about 75 converts from Yathrib met with him.
What did they promise him?
This was crucial. They swore an oath pledging to protect Muhammad as they would protect their own wives and children. A full military and political allegiance. In return, the tradition says, they were promised paradise.
So this wasn't just about faith, it was a concrete alliance.
Absolutely. It provided the security guarantee needed for the Muslims to leave Mecca. This agreement paved the way for the Hijra in 622 CE. That migration marks year one of the Islamic calendar, the beginning of the Muslim community as a distinct political entity, the Ummah. It's arguably the pivotal turning point.
So the Hijra happens. Muhammad and his close companion Abu Bakr make the final, perilous journey to Yathrib, soon to be known as Medina, the city of the Prophet, in September 622. This move fundamentally changes everything.
It's a total shift. In Mecca, he was a persecuted preacher. In Medina, he immediately becomes a community leader, a statesman, building a new kind of society from the ground up.
What were the first practical steps?
Well, first, establishing the community structure. You had the Meccan immigrants, the Muhajirun, who'd left everything behind, and the Medinan helpers, the Ansar, who welcomed them. Muhammad's first major act was to buy a plot of land and begin construction.
For the first mosque.
Exactly. But it wasn't just a place for prayer. This first mosque was multifunctional. It served as his home, a community center, a place for political discussions, legal rulings, even distributing charity. It became the literal and symbolic heart of the new Muslim community.
And the sources say it was quite open initially.
Yes, apparently Jews and even visiting Christians sometimes participated in discussions there. It was the central hub for this new coalition.
And with a growing community, they needed practical ways to organize, like calling people to prayer.
Right. How do you gather everyone? Muhammad apparently considered using a ram's horn, the Jewish shofar, or maybe a wooden clapper like some Christian communities used.
But he chose something different.
Yes. According to tradition, one of his followers had a dream about the call to prayer, the adhan. Simple, powerful words proclaiming God's greatness. Muhammad approved it and chose Bilal, a freed Abyssinian slave known for his incredibly strong voice, to be the first muezzin.
So the sound itself, Bilal's voice calling Allahu Akbar, became a distinct symbol of this new faith.
Precisely. It marked a break from existing traditions, emphasizing this new, direct call to worship.
This practical leadership is really evident in what's known as the Constitution of Medina. Tell us about that document.
It's a fascinating and incredibly important document, though perhaps constitution is a bit of a modern term. It seems more like a series of unilateral declarations or agreements Muhammad established shortly after arriving.
Not really a negotiated treaty then.
Probably not in the way we think of it. Its main purpose was practical administration. It formally established the Ummah, the community of believers, including the Muhajirun and Ansar, as a single political entity, superseding old tribal loyalties, at least in theory.
What did it cover?
Things like regulating blood money payments between different groups, organizing defense, crucially. It stipulated that all parties, including the Jewish tribes of Medina, were bound to defend the oasis against outside attack.
So it explicitly included the Jewish tribes in this mutual defense pact.
Yes, initially. It guaranteed them religious freedom and community autonomy under Muhammad's overall political authority in exchange for their participation in the common defense. It was a pragmatic political arrangement for survival.
And this shift to governing a community changed the nature of the revelations Muhammad received.
Absolutely. If you compare the Quranic verses revealed in Mecca with those revealed in Medina, there's a noticeable shift in focus. The Meccan verses are often more focused on theology, warnings about Judgment Day, stories of earlier prophets, the nature of God. The Medinan verses start dealing much more with practical matters. Rules for marriage and inheritance, criminal law, how to distribute spoils of war, regulations for fasting and charity, how the community should function. It reflects his new role as head of state.
There was also a major ritual shift around this time, wasn't there? The change in the direction of prayer, the Qibla.
Yes, a hugely significant change happening around 624 CE. For the first year and a half or so in Medina, Muslims had prayed facing Jerusalem, honoring the tradition of earlier prophets venerated in Judaism and Christianity.
So why the change?
Muhammad received revelations instructing the community to turn and face the Kaaba in Mecca instead. This was a massive statement.
Politically significant, not just ritually.
Enormously so. It ritually distinguished the Muslim community from the Jewish tribes in Medina with whom relations were becoming strained. It reoriented the faith towards Arabia, towards Mecca, symbolically reclaiming the tradition of Abraham, believed to have built the Kaaba. It asserted the unique identity and destiny of Islam.
This growing consolidation in Medina inevitably led to conflict with Mecca, right? The Quraysh weren't just going to let this new power base grow unchallenged.
No way. They saw it as a direct threat, religiously, politically, and economically, as Muslim raids on their caravans began to disrupt trade. The first major military clash came in 624, the Battle of Badr.
And this was a pivotal moment.
Absolutely decisive. Muhammad led a small force, maybe around 300 Muslims, primarily intending to raid a large Meccan caravan. Instead, they ended up facing a much larger Meccan army, perhaps close to 1,000 men, sent out to protect the caravan.
And Muslims were heavily outnumbered.
Severely. But Muhammad showed real tactical skill. He secured the water wells at Badr first, forcing the Meccans to fight for water. He positioned his men strategically, apparently making the Meccans fight uphill and facing the morning sun.
And the result?
A stunning victory for the Muslims. Many key Meccan leaders were killed. It was a massive morale boost. They saw it as clear evidence of divine support. The Quran mentions God sending angels, 1,000 of them, to help them fight. Badr cemented Muhammad's authority and proved the Ummah could defend itself.
But the Meccans came back for revenge, didn't they?
They did the very next year, 625, at the Battle of Uhud, just outside Medina. This time, the Meccans brought a larger force, around 3,000 men.
And Uhud didn't go as well for the Muslims.
No, it was a serious setback. The Muslims initially had the upper hand, but a group of archers that Muhammad had specifically ordered to hold a strategic position left their posts, thinking the battle was won, to get spoils.
A breakdown in discipline.
Exactly, which allowed the skilled Meccan cavalry, led by Khalid ibn al-Walid, who later became a famous Muslim general, to flank the Muslims. The Muslim lines broke, they suffered heavy losses, and Muhammad himself was injured.
What was the impact of that defeat?
It was a shock, a test of faith. It also created significant social disruption, particularly a large number of widows and orphans. Some scholars connect this directly to the subsequent Quranic revelations that permitted polygyny, allowing men to marry up to 4 wives, partly as a way to provide social and economic security for these women and children in the aftermath of Uhud.
The conflict escalated further with the Battle of the Trench in 627. This sounds like a major siege.
It was the biggest threat Medina had faced yet. The Meccan leader, Abu Sufyan, assembled a massive coalition army, maybe 10,000 men from various tribes, intending to wipe out the Muslim community once and for all.
How did the Muslims possibly defend against that kind of force?
Muhammad adopted a novel defensive strategy, apparently suggested by a Persian convert named Salman al-Farisi. Instead of meeting the coalition in open battle, they dug a huge defensive trench, a khandak, across the northernmost exposed approaches to Medina.
Trench warfare in 7th century Arabia.
Exactly. It was completely unfamiliar to the Arab coalition forces. Their cavalry was useless against it. The trench, combined with Medina's natural defenses on other sides, effectively neutralized the coalition's numerical superiority.
So the siege failed.
It did. After a couple of tense weeks, facing frustration, bad weather, and growing dissension within their own ranks, the coalition army just melted away. The siege collapsed. It was a major strategic victory for Muhammad, demonstrating Medina's resilience.
But the aftermath of the trench led to one of the most difficult and controversial episodes in Muhammad's time in Medina, the fate of the Jewish tribe, the Banu Qurayza.
Yes, this is a deeply troubling and heavily debated event. The Banu Qurayza were one of the main Jewish tribes still residing within Medina, inside the defensive perimeter.
And they were accused of treachery during the siege.
According to the traditional Islamic sources, yes. The accusation was that during the most critical point of the siege, when the Muslims were stretched thin, the Banu Qurayza entered into negotiations with the attacking coalition, effectively planning to betray the Muslims from within.
What happened after the siege lifted?
The Muslims immediately turned their attention to the Qurayza, besieging their strongholds for about 25 days. Eventually, the Qurayza surrendered. They agreed to accept the judgment of Sa'd ibn Mu'adh.
Who was he?
He was a chief of one of the main Medinan Arab tribes, the Aus, who had been traditional allies of the Banu Qurayza before Islam. He had been severely wounded during the siege.
And what was his judgment according to the traditional accounts?
His judgment, reportedly based on his interpretation of Jewish law regarding treason, was harsh. All the adult men of the Banu Qurayza were to be executed, their property confiscated and distributed among the Muslims, and the women and children taken captive as slaves.
And Muhammad approved this.
The sources say Muhammad affirmed Sa'd's judgment, stating it was in accordance with God's decree. The traditional accounts then describe the mass execution of the men, with numbers typically ranging from 600 to 900.
This account is intensely debated by historians, isn't it?
Hugely debated. Some scholars, like W.N. Arafat and Barakat Ahmad, have raised serious questions about the reliability and scale reported in the traditional sources, which were written down much later. They argue the numbers might be vastly inflated, or the story might conflate different events, or perhaps it was shaped by later political contexts to justify harsh measures against perceived internal enemies.
What are the counter-arguments?
Other historians argue that while brutal, the reported events are plausible within the context of 7th century Arabian tribal warfare and the extreme existential threat Medina faced. They point to the consistency within the early sources.
So there's no easy consensus.
No, it remains a deeply contested point. But regardless of the exact details and numbers, the traditional narrative of the event signifies a final, decisive break with the Jewish tribes who had opposed Muhammad, and it stands as a stark example of the consolidation of his power and the severe consequences for perceived treason against the Ummah.
So after the failure of the siege at the Battle of the Trench and dealing with the internal situation with the Banu Qurayza, Muhammad's position in Medina was significantly strengthened. The tide really turned against Mecca.
It did. A key moment was the Treaty of Hudaybiyah in 628. Initially, it seemed like a setback for the Muslims. They weren't allowed to perform the pilgrimage to Mecca that year. But crucially, the treaty involved the Meccans recognizing Muhammad's community as a legitimate political entity, an equal negotiating partner.
So it gave him breathing room and legitimacy.
Exactly. And it allowed Islam to spread more peacefully for a time. When allies of the Meccans broke the truce about 2 years later, Muhammad had the justification and now the strength to act decisively.
This leads to the conquest of Mecca in 630 CE.
Yes, he assembled a large force, reportedly around 10,000 Muslims, and marched on Mecca.
Was it a bloody battle?
Surprisingly little bloodshed, actually. The Meccans, seeing the overwhelming force and perhaps the futility of resistance, largely capitulated. Muhammad entered the city almost peacefully.
What was his approach to his former enemies, the people who had persecuted him for years?
This is where his political acumen really shines. He declared a general amnesty for most Meccans, forgiving past offenses. There were a few exceptions, individuals specifically excluded, but by and large, it was an act of reconciliation designed to ensure stability.
And what about the Kaaba, the center of the old religion?
That was a crucial moment. He went directly to the Kaaba and ordered the destruction of all the idols within it and around it, reportedly over 300 of them. It was a powerful symbolic act, cleansing the sanctuary and definitively establishing monotheism as the religion of Mecca and, by extension, Arabia.
Just 2 years later, in 632, he led the Hajj pilgrimage one last time, the farewell pilgrimage.
Yes, a hugely significant event. Tens of thousands of Muslims traveled with him. It was his opportunity to solidify the rituals of the Hajj, performing them in a way that would become the standard model for all future generations.
And he delivered a famous sermon during this pilgrimage.
He did, the farewell sermon. In it, he reiterated key principles of Islam. Things like the sanctity of life and property, the prohibition of usury, riba, the final abolition of the pre-Islamic system of blood feuds and vendettas.
And emphasizing equality among Muslims.
Absolutely. He stressed the brotherhood of all believers, explicitly stating that Arabs had no superiority over non-Arabs, nor whites over blacks, except through piety and good action. It was a final summation of the social and ethical vision he had established.
Soon after returning to Medina from this pilgrimage, he fell ill.
Yes. The accounts describe him suffering from severe headaches and fever. He eventually asked to be moved to the apartment of his wife Aisha, one of Abu Bakr's daughters.
How did his final moments unfold, according to the sources?
He continued to oversee the community's affairs as much as possible, appointing Abu Bakr to lead the prayers when he became too weak. He passed away in June 632, apparently resting his head in Aisha's lap. His last reported words were a plea for forgiveness and to join the highest companionship in paradise.
His death, while expected eventually, must have sent shockwaves through the community. And it immediately led to a crisis, didn't it?
An immediate and profound crisis over leadership. Who would succeed him? He was the prophet, but also the head of state. Could anyone inherit both roles?
What happened?
There was intense debate and disagreement almost instantly. One prominent companion, Umar ibn al-Khattab, acted quickly and decisively, nominating Abu Bakr Muhammad's father-in-law, close friend, and one of the earliest converts. Abu Bakr was quickly acclaimed as the first caliph, the successor or deputy.
But not everyone agreed.
No. Another significant group believed that Muhammad had, either explicitly or implicitly, designated his cousin and son-in-law, Ali ibn Abi Talib, as his rightful successor, particularly emphasizing Ali's spiritual closeness and kinship.
And this disagreement is fundamental to Islamic history.
Absolutely fundamental. This initial dispute over succession, whether leadership should go to the most respected companion chosen by consensus, the basis of Sunni Islam, or remain within the Prophet's family line through Ali, the basis of Shia Islam, became the defining political and theological split within the Muslim world, a division that continues to this day.
Let's shift now to his lasting impact. His legacy is built on the foundations he laid down.
It really is. His legacy rests on two core pillars that continue to shape Islamic belief, law, and culture. First, obviously, the Quran. For Muslims, this is the literal, verbatim word of God revealed to Muhammad.
And the second pillar?
The Sunnah. This refers to the Prophet's way, his teachings, his actions, his approvals and disapprovals, basically his normative example for living.
And how do we know the Sunnah?
Primarily through those collections of hadith we mentioned earlier, the reports about what he said and did, and also through the seerah, the biographies. The Sunnah is absolutely crucial.
Why crucial? Isn't the Quran the ultimate authority?
It is, but the Quran often gives general principles or commands without detailing exactly how to implement them. The Sunnah fills in those practical details.
Can you give an example?
Sure. The Quran commands Muslims to perform the daily prayers, salat. But it doesn't spell out the specific number of prayers per day, the exact times, or the precise sequence of standing, bowing, prostrating, and reciting. All of those essential details come from the Sunnah, from the documented practice of Muhammad.
So the Sunnah acts as the practical guide, the model for how to live as a pious Muslim.
Exactly. It provides the blueprint for everything from prayer and pilgrimage rituals to rules of etiquette, family law, and personal conduct. Pious emulation of the Prophet's example is a cornerstone of Islamic life.
And beyond the strictly religious, there's a clear legacy of social reform.
Definitely. Compared to the pre-Islamic Arabian context, the changes he instituted were radical, especially concerning social welfare and the status of women.
How so for women?
Well, under the prevailing tribal customs, women often had very few rights, particularly regarding property and inheritance. Islamic law, as revealed in the Quran and exemplified by Muhammad, granted women specific rights to own, inherit, and manage property, which was a major shift. It also placed limits on polygyny and regulated divorce.
And his own personal example.
The traditions also highlight his personal conduct. He's depicted as helping with household chores, mending his own clothes, being accessible, and importantly, engaging in consultation and dialogue with his wives, treating them as partners. This set a standard that challenged the patriarchal norms of the time. The mandatory zakat we discussed also institutionalized Social Security.
Finally, let's think about his place in wider history. How is he viewed today, both within and outside Islam?
Within the Muslim world, the reverence is immense. Devotion to the Prophet is central to faith. Whenever his name is mentioned, it's customary to add a phrase of blessing, like Lallahu alayhi wasallam, may God honor him and grant him peace. His birthday is widely celebrated. He's also recognized as a prophet or significant spiritual figure in other faiths, like the Baha'i faith and Sikhism.
And how has Western thought grappled with him over the centuries? It hasn't always been positive.
No, certainly not. Views have varied wildly, often reflecting the biases of the era. During the Enlightenment, figures like Voltaire were initially quite critical, sometimes portraying him as a charlatan, though even Voltaire later acknowledged his genius as a legislator and leader.
But others offered more positive assessments.
Yes. Someone like Thomas Carlyle, the 19th century historian, in his famous work on heroes, hero worship, and the heroic in history, devoted a chapter to Muhammad as the hero as prophet. Carlyle strongly defended Muhammad's sincerity, arguing that such a world-changing movement couldn't possibly have been built on cynical deceit. He praised his leadership and silent great soul.
And modern historical consensus.
Most modern historians, regardless of their personal beliefs, reject the simplistic imposter theory. The sheer hardship Muhammad endured, the risks he took, the consistency of his message, it all points towards someone who profoundly believed in the divine origin of his mission. The debate now is more about interpreting his actions within his historical context.
One last point. The sensitivity around visual depictions of Muhammad. Where does that come from?
It primarily stems from concerns expressed in certain hadith traditions. The underlying worry was that creating images of him could lead to veneration of the image itself, potentially sliding into idolatry, which Islam strictly forbids. Worship is reserved for God alone.
So the emphasis shifted to other art forms.
Exactly. In much of the Sunni Islamic world, this led to a flourishing of calligraphy and geometric patterns as the primary forms of religious artistic expression rather than figural representation.
But it wasn't an absolute ban everywhere, always.
That's important nuance, yes. Historically, particularly in Persian and Ottoman miniature painting traditions, depictions of Muhammad do exist, especially in illustrations of events like his miraculous night journey and ascension to heaven, Miraj. However, even in these depictions, his face is often veiled, or sometimes represented symbolically as a flame or a source of light, emphasizing his spiritual essence rather than his physical likeness.
So wrapping this up, we've followed this incredible journey from an orphan merchant in a divided Mecca through immense hardship and rejection to receiving revelations, migrating, and ultimately becoming the spiritual and political architect of a unified state in Medina and laying the groundwork for a global civilization.
It's an absolutely extraordinary trajectory. He wasn't just a prophet, he was a lawgiver, a community builder, a military strategist, a social reformer.
What's the core takeaway for understanding his enduring significance today?
I think the key thing to grasp, the reason his legacy remains so potent and often contested, is precisely that fusion of the spiritual and the temporal. He didn't just found a religion, he founded a state governed by that religion's principles.
A political philosopher in action, almost?
You could say that. He legislated on everything from taxation, zakat, and family law to warfare and social welfare, all grounded in divine revelation. Think about it. How many figures in history have simultaneously launched one of the world's major religions and forged the political and legal framework for a new empire, all within a single lifetime?
It's a rare combination.
Extremely rare. And that historical merging of religious authority with political power, where divine law becomes state law, is arguably the defining characteristic of the civilization he initiated. Understanding that fusion is absolutely crucial for understanding not just Islamic history, but also ongoing dynamics in global politics, law, and culture today, it continues to shape the world in profound ways.
A legacy that demands deep understanding. Thank you for guiding us through this complex history.
It was my pleasure. A fascinating subject.
That's all for this deep dive. Join us next time as we continue to explore the forces that shape our world.